One of the most complex topics whenever I'm teaching Photoshop and Substance Painter and anything related to color is blending modes. So blending modes are all of these things that you see right here, which is how we blend two images together or two layers together. So if I, for instance, add a red color over here, it will not be the same to use a lighten, then to use an overlay, then to use a color burn, then to use a divide, and it will all yield different results. So today I'm going to show you what each of these layers do. Let's go. Once I've explained that, guys, this video will be very technical, but I assure you, if you watch all of this information, whenever you're confronted with this sort of like blending modes, not only here in Photoshop, but in Substance Painter, in 3D Code, in Nuke, or in any other software, you will understand a little bit better how the colors are merged together. The first thing you need to know is that colors are divided into groups, or blend modes are divided into groups. We got the normal, the darken, the lighten, the contrast, the inversion, cancellation, and component. All of these ones right here are the exact same ones that when you turn on a color over here, you're gonna see on this side over here. And now we're gonna go through all of them. So let's go. The first one, as the name implies, is of course the normal mode, and this is just one on top of the other. If you're gonna do some sort of like 2D animation instead of After Effects, you're probably gonna be doing normal effects, and it just overwrites whatever information was beneath it, and it replaces it with the information that you have right here. It can be a different hue, it can be a different value, it can be anything you want, and it will just be one on top of the other. Now, the first one, well, there's another one. This one I'm just going to skip, which is the dissolve. It doesn't really like do much. Gives this sort of like grainy effect. I never use it. But the first one that we're going to talk about are, of course, this darken modes right here. And darken is a very, very common like layer that you're going to be using. What the darken color does is it compares the colors on both layers and picks the one that it's darker. Therefore, its name, darken. So in this case, for instance, you can see that when we turn on this new layer, the pixels on this part of the eyebrow, they do not change at all because those are the darker pixels, and it doesn't need to do any replacement with the like the pixels or the colors on top of it because it's already dark. It's already very, very dark right there. For all of the other colors, it will again pick the darker color and it will blend it so that you get a new different variation, and this is what we see right here. So as you can see on this part right here where we had this very bright yellows, now this blue color that we have is darker in tone, or not saturation, in value. It's darker in value, and it will blend them together and it will generate this. You can also see that over here we get this darker effect and we get all of this replaced. So that's darken. So again, important to know this here. Pixels darker than the base color will not change, which is what we're seeing right here on the eyebrow. The next layer is one of my favorites, called the multiply layer, and as you can see, it does gives us a little different result here with our character, because multiply will replace the elements. It will multiply the values and it will always give you a darker tone. So in this particular case, you can see that this dark tones that we have right there will be replaced by even darker tones once we add the colors on top of it. This is an excellent layer to add a little bit of depth and more like interest to your shadows, for instance. So if, let's say, I add a sort of like a blue hue on my new layer right there. So if I add, let's say, a blue color on all of my shadows, right? Like I wanna tone or color balance some of my shadows here with the character, and I change this to multiply, it will be a darker blue, and then we can blend, of course, with opacity to add a little bit of that extra new hue to the element, and again, bring the colors down way, way more. Now, the multiply is also very important because, again, since this is a mathematical operation, if you get, for instance, a black and white image or a black and white pattern, you can very easily mask out certain parts of that pattern by using the multiply effect. See that? Oh, that's actually divide. Let's Control B. There we go. So if you have a black and white image like this one and you multiply, the white, it acts as a zero value, a value of 0, and when you multiply by 0, you get 0, right? So that's exactly what is happening right here. Now, of course, you cannot get, like in this case, darker than the black color right here. This is like the limit. So even though we're multiplying, we're just going to be replacing everything with a dark color. Even if you add multiple of these ones right here, you're just going to get a more solid outline, but this dark right here is the exact same dark that we had at the beginning of the element right there. So if you have a black and white image and you want to remove the whites quickly, multiply is the way to go. The next layer is color burn, and this one is used quite a bit, especially when you want to really, really punch the colors of your object. So for instance, if I want to add like a really strong highlight right here, I can grab a very saturated and very bright color, and when I paint this right here, in color burn, you're gonna get way more contrast. See, so it's kind of like as the name implies, it burns the color, it darkens the element, but it pushes the saturation as well, which is very important. Not all of the layers behave this way, but in this case, you do push the saturation and everything quite high. So as you can see, if I just add like a very quick like color burn, everything looks like it's on fire, right? And of course, if we were using a different color, let's say for instance a blue right here, we're also gonna get something similar. So this is the blue. Right now it's set to normal. Again, replacing everything, and we set this to color burn. There we go, and everything burns, so it's way more intense, way darker. We bring the tones or the values down, and we push the saturation up. So as you can see, we get this sort of like very crunchy effect. It's very grungy. I like it. I don't use it all the time. An important note about the color burn that I want to mention is that if you use white, so if you paint white with your object and then you try doing color burn, nothing's gonna happen. Oh, interesting, right? The reason why this is because we need saturation for this to actually work. So we need to have at least a little bit of saturation, and that's what's going to give us the change in tone. So if you use white with color burn, nothing happens. Now, similar to color burn, we get linear burn. And in the same way, if you're using white with linear burn, which is this one right here, remember, all of this are supposed to darken things. It will not do that because white is not being, like when you use the mathematical operations right here, the white is pretty much saying, hey, nothing is happening. But if you have a different color and you use linear burn, what you're going to see is that we are going to blend both elements. But one of the important things about the linear burn is that it will decrease the brightness. Okay, so this one will decrease the brightness. Again, let's compare. So this one right here is linear burn, okay? And this one right here is color burn with the same thing. So color burn compared to linear burn will keep the brightness, or it will push the brightness in the same amount. The linear burn will not. It will sort of flatten everything out, and you will get a more uniform look. Again, it's very aggressive. This kind of layers are really aggressive. So if you're going to be using them, I strongly recommend that you bring the opacity down or play with some of the tones. You can go a little bit towards the white so that the effect is not as intense. But they're a really good way to, in one of them, punch some of the colors and generate a very intense contrast. And in this one in particular, the linear burn, it's going to keep your brightness pretty much stable. Now, finally, in this group, we get the darker color. And as you can see, the darker color will do something very interesting because a darker color will literally just pick the areas where the darker color is. So if you have a value like this, like very bright blue right here, we're only getting or obtaining the blues on the high points or the high areas of the underlying image. So if this image right here, the original element, the original abomination here, changes the value, as you can see, if it gets lighter, we're going to get more of the blue. But if it gets darker, we're going to get more of the darks. So this is kind of like a mask that you use. There's no blend between the layers. You're not going to get any mix, but you're just going to sort of select or mask out all of the pixels that are darker. So if the pixels are darker on the underlying image, they will be seen on top, or they will override the pixels that we have right here. However, if we use a darker color, we're gonna see more of this stuff, which again, I mean, it's not something that I use a lot, but you could maybe use this for sort of half-tone things or something like that. It just, again, will analyze which one has the darker tones, and it will display those darker tones. If you're working with white, again, nothing happens, right? Because white is the top lighter, or it's the lighter color or lighter hue or variation that you can get in here. Now we're gonna jump to the lighten section, which is this one right here: lighten, screen, color dodge, linear dodge, and lighter color. And opposed to what we just saw with the darken colors, the lighten ones will give you the opposite. They will push the light colors up. So if we, for instance, again grab this a light blue color over here, and we set this to lighten, we are going to get most of the light colors on the top. So we're going to blend the colors, and it's going to pick the colors that are lighter on the scene. If we go for a darker tone right here, as you can see, and the closer we get to black, nothing is going to happen. So similar to how white changed the way we saw things on the darken section, in the lighten section, black will pretty much be overridden in this case. And the same happens for the patterns. So if we grab a pattern, and what we want to do is we want to remove the dark colors of the pattern, and we're just going to be left with the whites, we can just set this to lighten. In that case, dark goes out the window, and lighten becomes this, where we just get the light colors here on the image. The next one is a screen, and there's one important thing that I want to note about lighten and screen. So when using the masks, right, what I was just mentioning, like if you grab a black and white image and you want to cut out one of those colors, I mentioned that you can use Lighten, and yes, you can use it, but actually it's better to use a screen, because as you can see there with Lighten, you will get a little bit of a mix between the layers. So even though it is cutting out the black, screen will give you a clean cut, like absolutely clean cut, and the other one will give you a little bit of a blend. And we can see this again if we grab colors. Let's grab like a green color right here, like relatively clean green. If we paint, right now we're in screen, and as you can see, it's kind of like a veil, like a little layer that's just on top of the object, but it's not really giving you any blend. And if you go to Lighten, you will get a blend, okay, right? So they will be comparing colors, and you're going to be getting a little bit of a blend right there. The next one, this one, they use this all the time, Color Dodge. Color Dodge is really good to really punch out the light elements on our object, in this case the abomination. So this one is the one that you could use, for instance, if you want to add like a glowy effect on the eyes of the character. So if I want to make this eyes glow, for instance, one thing I can do is I can just grab, like, let's say a red, like a very intense red color right here. Let's add a soft brush right there. Okay, and if I just set this to Color Dodge, as you can see, I'm gonna get the whites from underneath, right? So the whitest pixels, they're gonna be punching through, and we're gonna blend them with whatever color it is we're adding on top. So anytime you wanna have something that glows or that really like generates and keeps all of the highlights from the underlying layers, Color Dodge is really good. Which is similar to Linear Dodge, but it's not the same. Because remember how on the other one, on the Color Burn and Linear Burn, Color Burn will burn the object and Linear Burn will keep the highlights? Well, same thing here. Color Dodge will push the intensity of the highlights. Linear Dodge will not change the saturation. As you can see here, we are going to keep the, or we're going to, how to say this properly? It will reflect the blend color by increasing the overall brightness of the whole thing, right? So Color Dodge, we will increase the brightness, but we will keep the saturated sort of like effect. And Linear Dodge will only increase the brightness. So we'll compare both tones, and it will push the brightness over the whole thing. Another way you can see this is that Color Dodge will increase the contrast as well. So as you can see, we get this contrast effect. So we really push the shadows and we really push the lights, and Linear Dodge will only push the lights. It will only push the brightness. You can, these are pretty much interchangeable. Well, not interchangeable, but if you want to have more color, Color Dodge. If you just want to have brightness, Linear Dodge is also a very good way. And finally, lighter color, similar to darker color, it will pick whatever color was the one that was winning in terms of being lighter, and it will display that. It's just like a switch. You will not have any blend between the layers. And with that, we're done with the lighter section of the element. So this right here, the darken and the lighten, are the ones that you will normally use when you want to keep math very simple. Do you want to burn things? You want to bring things down? You will use things like darken, multiply, color burn. Do you want to push things up? Do you want to bring them up in terms of light and brightness? Color dodge, screen, lighten, Linear Dodge. All of this will push things to the upper side, towards the lights, okay? So, lighten and darken. Now we're going to jump to the interesting part, which is the contrast, okay? This contrast section. And you probably have heard about overlays. So let me get just like a random, like, I don't know, like a wood texture or something like that. Because these images that we're about to see, they work very differently than what you would expect, because there's a little bit of a mix of both. So in this particular case, as you can see with this wood image, we have lighter values and darker values. So of course we can go here and use multiply to get rid of the lighter values, or use color dodge to get rid of the darker values. So we already know this. But if we go to overlay, what's going to happen here with overlay is that it will multiply these colors or the elements of the object, and it will try to replace the, well, not replace, it will not, that's actually it, it will not replace the original values, okay? So the original pixels that we have will not be replaced, but rather they're going to be multiplied either higher or lower, depending if the image is lighter or darker. They will be multiplied to get a blend of both of the elements, okay? Now, overlay here, as you can see, is tricky, because overlay will keep or will preserve the high points and the shadows, or the highlights and the shadows of the base color. This is very important. So the higher point right here, like if we can analyze the value of this pixel right here, you can see that right now the value, if we go here to saturation value, there we go. So we have a value of 100% right there. Let's go for a little bit lighter. So this one right here on the bare point. So it's 85%. So once I add this one as an overlay, that point right there will preserve the value, okay? So the 85% that we have is still there. The value is the same. What changes is the hue. There is a blend. Something is going to change because we got new colors and new elements, but the highest point and the lowest point will remain the same. So the question that I get all the time is, should I use overlay or should I use multiply? They will yield different results. Sometimes you will want one if you want to preserve the highlights and the shadows, and if you want to bring the shadows down or bring the highlights up, you might use a lighten or a multiply, because remember, this one's do change for, sorry, like a color dodge. Color dodge will push the values up. If I select color dodge, this one is now all the way up there to 100. And if I select multiply, you can see that this one is now lower. It's not 85 anymore. Now it's been lowered down to 60. So again, darken and lighten will change that sort of like a baseline. Overlay will keep it. Now the two next ones are a little bit interesting, because if overlay was confusing because it does not change that sort of like baseline and just blends things together, the next one, which is soft light, will do it. It will change the baseline, and it's very similar to using a darken or a lighten layer. So it's kind of like using, at least in the documentation it says, it's kind of like using a spotlight or a soft light, like at 50% intensity, where you're multiplying or dividing depending on the tones of your color, but you're only doing it like at a 50%. I like to call the soft light like the soft overlay. So if you like how overlay looks, but it's a little bit too much, soft light is usually like half of that. And it will change the baseline. So you can see right here again on the point that we're no longer at 85, we're at 78. On the shadow right there, and if I move over here, you can see we're at 96. So it is changing the highlights, because it is like using this darken and lighten like algorithms or multiplying things, but it will not be as intense as the other one. And it's the exact same thing for the hard light, it's just more intense. So hard light and overlay might look similar, but they're not the same, because hard light, as you can see, does change the highlights and the dark elements, and overlay does not. Okay, so overlay, I kind of like to, again, to see this as like the base layer. Overlay is base, it keeps everything the same. Soft light, it does half of that, so it will blend and it will push things up and down, but it will do it softly. And hard light will push things up and down very intensely, like at 150%. So if you want to have a lot of change and a lot of contrast, hard light is going to give you a nice result there. Vivid light will do it even more. As you can see, this is hard light, this is vivid light, and it will really crunch up your colors, which again can be useful. Right now I'm using an image, but if we go back to sort of like hand painted stuff, like if I grab this sort of like orangey highlighted color and I add a little bit here, up here, over here, and I set this layer to vivid light, it will burn the whole thing. It will make it glow, or it will just push the values and the contrast up, which is a lot more than hard light. You can see the difference: hard light, vivid light. Overlay won't do much. Remember, this will add and blend the colors, but it will not change the high points and the low points of your image, but this one's will. So as you can see, that's the change that we see right there with overlay, soft light, hard light, and vivid light. Linear light, as we've mentioned before, linear usually means that it will not replace, what's the word? It will keep things a little bit like more linear. So there will be changes, but it will try to keep them a little bit more uniform. So vivid light blends a little bit more, especially the dark colors. You can see how vivid light pretty much brings or keeps the darker colors. Linear light does not. Linear light overwrites those colors, especially here under the eyes, and you can see how the color remains a lot more like uniform along the surface. Pin light does the opposite. So if linear light and vivid light push towards the lighter colors, pin light actually does the opposite. So if the colors that you're trying to blend are too bright, it will ignore them. And if the underlying color is too dark, it will add more of the value right there. So as you can see, this is giving me a little bit of a like surface effect. But if I grab like a darker color like this, or like dark green right here, you can see that we're not going to see too much of a change. Okay, so you can see, especially here on the darker, like dark gray background, like nothing is happening because there's nothing to blend with. So these are, I would say, are a little bit more like specific cases. Hard mix, again, as with all of the other final layers of the other sections, they'll give you a slightly different effect right there, which I don't use a lot, or never actually. So yeah, pin light will do an effect where it brings, and it works a little bit more with the shadows. So from 50% gray and lower, and linear light is from 50% gray and lighter. Okay, those are like the areas where you're gonna be affecting things. Now, this next layer is actually very important. Let me bring another image. Let's look for like a, I don't know, like a tree leaf. So this next element, or this next layer, blending mode, goes into the, as you can see here, into the inversion and cancellation sort of things. So how does this work? Well, for the first one, which is the difference, it will look at the pixels and it will remove the pixels that are of a certain sort of like brightness for the whole thing. So difference will look at the color information of each channel and subtract either the blend colors, so the one on the top, or the base color, depending on which one has the greater value, okay? So the greater brightness value. So the parts that are brighter on the character, like this red ones right here, will be subtracted from my leaf, right? So that's why we're removing sort of like the green color of the leaf, and that's why we're left with this like red color right here. And the same thing will happen on the other side. So the leaf is removing certain elements from our object. Is this something that I use a lot? Not really, but there's one very cool option where you can use that one, and that's when you're mixing normal maps and you're painting normal maps. You can use this to find the difference because it will pop out at you if you have an image. Let me show you. So if you have two images that are exactly the same, like this one and this one right here, and I set this to difference, as you can see, there's not going to be any difference, right? Because they're the exact same element. However, if this one is slightly lighter, you're going to start seeing where all of the, like, which ones of this is lighter than the other, and that's the sort of stuff that we're going to start seeing. So it is useful. These are, I would normally call these layers like the utility layers, because they can work to generate that sort of effect, like find the differences between two images. This is also one thing that you can use, like if you have an original image and you suspect that someone took your image and did some editing, you can bring them, and if you turn on the difference and you see difference, you can immediately tell that one of the images has been changed. So yeah, that one's pretty cool. Exclusion, it's the exact same thing as difference, but a little bit less intense. So if we go here to exclusion, you're gonna see that from difference, that's the difference, and then we got exclusion. It's the exact same thing, just way less intense, kind of like 50% less intense, similar to soft light and hard light. So pretty much the same thing. So subtraction is really interesting because what subtraction will do is it will subtract the color information from the parts of your image, in this case this like wood image that we have that has color. So as you can see, the shadows, all of the shadow areas are not really taking anything out because there's no color there, but all of the other elements that had this sort of like orangey vibe are removing that information from our object right there, from our character. And finally, the divide one will take the information from each of them and they will divide them. And you know, when you divide something, you reduce the number. So that's why we're getting to 0, which in this case 0 is going to become this white color right here. Again, not layers that I use that much. Most of the layers that I use are going to be on the dark and lighten and contrast layers, but important to know. And finally, we got the component, which is hue. So with this one, we just blend the hue of the element, so just the color of the element. Saturation, we just blend the saturation. Color, we just blend the color. And luminosity, we blend the dark and light colors of the object. Again, not something that I use a lot. There are certain things, for instance, like the hue layer is really good if you want to add like a glaze layer on top of your texture sometimes, but it's not something that I use a lot. I prefer to keep things like a little bit simpler with all of the ones right here. So that's it. Those are the blending modes, my friend, and that's how the blending modes affect your character here inside of Photoshop, inside of Substance, inside of 3D Code, inside of all of the other softwares. I know it's a lot of information. Again, my intention with this video is not for you to be an expert at blending and colors, just so that you get a general idea of how things work. So just to do a quick recap, darken will bring the colors down and the brightness down. Lighten will do the opposite. It will bring them higher. Contrast, which is our overlay and things, will try to keep the brightness at the same level. Some of them will push it up, some of them will push them down, but at least overlay will keep the brightness at the same level and it will blend the colors. And then we got the utility layers that we have over here. So that's it. Find the layer that you need the most for any of the softwares that you're using and use all of these blending modes to get a nicer, more cohesive result in your textures. If you want to learn a little bit more about some of these things, we talk about them during our live streams. There's a little bit of this information in our Substance course as well, where we use this blending modes to create more interesting textures. You can check that in the description. And that's pretty much it. If you want to learn a specific topic, let me know here in the comments, and I'll see you back on the next one.